Nneka is desperate. With no job and her mother fighting for her life, she accepts a suspicious cleaning offer in Ikoyi with a salary too good to be true, 300,000 naira. But she quickly realizes this is no ordinary job. Everyone is playing a role in a twisted game of cat and mouse. There is the predatory boss offering her the world in exchange for her soul, and the silent, rugged Gardner watching her every move from the dirt. As temptation mounts and a life-or-death crisis strikes her family, Nneka is pushed to the edge. Is she being hired, or is she being hunted? When the mask finally falls, will her faith save her, or has she walked into a trap she can't escape? In a house full of lies, the person holding the keys to her freedom might be the last one she suspects. Not everything that glitters is gold, and sometimes, the devil wears a bespoke suit while an angel hides in the mud. Welcome to the Folktale Bestie. We are so happy to have you here for this intense journey of love, faith, and suspense. If you enjoy stories that grip your heart and keep you guessing until the very end, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps us grow and bring you more amazing tales. Also, we want to meet you. Tell us in the comments, which country are you watching from right now? Let's get into the story. Nneka adjusted her worn-out skirt as she stepped out of the Danfo bus, the humid Lagos air clinging to her skin like a damp, suffocating blanket. The yellow bus roared away, its exhaust pipe coughing a black cloud of smoke that tasted of burnt diesel and frustration. Her landlord, Papa Uche, had given her a final ultimatum that morning. Pay the 3 months' rent arrears or sleep under the bridge. Nneka was a first-class graduate of economics from the University of Lagos, a distinction that was supposed to be a golden key to the corporate world. Yet 2 years after her NYSC, the only thing she had successfully economized was her meals. She was currently running on a formula of 0-1-0. No breakfast, a meager lunch, and prayer for dinner. As she navigated the uneven pavement of Ojalegba, dodging Okada riders who drove as if they had a spare life kept at home, the weight of her situation pressed down on her chest. The noise of Surulere was deafening, a chaotic symphony of generators, shouting conductors, and the latest Afrobeats blasting from a nearby barbershop. But it was the voice of her friend, Bizi, that rang loudest in her ears. They had met earlier that afternoon at a small buka, where Bizi was eating umla with an assortment of meats that Nneka could only dream of. Bizi looked fresh, her skin glowing, her wig expensive. "Nneka, look at you," Bizi had said, chewing a piece of shaki aggressively. "You are drying up. God is good, yes, but God gave you sense. Use what you have to get what you want. Lagos is not for the holy. That Oga at the oil company just wants a little company for the weekend. Is it too much to ask for a job and an apartment?" Nneka had sipped her pure water, her throat tight. "My body is the temple of the Lord, Bizi. I cannot trade my dignity for a salary." Bizi had laughed then, a cold, cynical sound. "Dignity? Can you cook dignity? Can dignity pay Papa Uche? Wake up, Abeg." Nneka shook the memory away as she turned the corner onto her street. She held onto her Bible tighter, her knuckles white. "My God will not shame me," she whispered, her lips moving silently against the roar of the city. "I have never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging for bread." But the bread was scarce, and the righteousness felt like a heavy coat in the tropical heat. She reached her compound, a dilapidated face-me-I-face-you, building where privacy was a myth and the walls had ears. Her heart skipped a beat. Papa Uche was there, sitting on a bench by the open gutter, chewing on a stick, his eyes scanning the tenants like a hawk looking for a rat. He saw her. "Ah, Madam Economist." Papa Uche's voice boomed, stopping Nneka in her tracks. He stood up, adjusting his wrapper. "I was beginning to think you had flown to Abuja to advise the president on the economy. Where is my money?" Nneka lowered her gaze. "Good evening, sir. Please, Papa Uche, I am expecting something by next week." "Next week? Next week." Papa Uche clapped his hands together, attracting the attention of Mama Chinidu, who was frying akara nearby. "That is what you said last month." "Nneka, look at me. I am not a charity organization. This house is for rent, not for revival ground. If I don't see my alert by 12 noon tomorrow, I will bring carpenter to remove your door. Let me see how you will sleep with mosquito and thief." "Please, sir." 12 noon, he barked, sitting back down and dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Nneka walked past him, the shame burning her cheeks. She could feel the eyes of the neighbors on her back, the pity, the judgment. She unlocked her small room, stepping into the stifling heat trapped inside. It was a tiny box containing a single mattress, a plastic table, and her framed degree on the wall. She sat on the edge of the mattress, her energy drained. She opened her bag and pulled out the only hope she had left, a crumpled flyer she had picked up from the floor of the bus. Urgent vacancy, cleaner needed in Ikoyi. Salary attractive. Call Femi. She stared at the paper. A cleaner. She remembered the nights she spent studying by candlelight to get her 4.5 GPA. She remembered the pride in her late father's eyes. An economist scrubbing toilets? Her pride revolted against the idea. It felt like a betrayal of her education, a mockery of her intellect. But then she looked at the door Papa Uche had threatened to remove. She looked at the empty pot in the corner. Pride goes before a fall, she murmured to the empty room. But I have already fallen. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. There was no time for self-pity. Surrelir was crushing her, and if scrubbing floors in the high-walled mansions of Ikoyi was the only way to keep a roof over her head without compromising her soul, then she would scrub until the tiles sparkled. She pulled out her cracked technophone and dialed the number on the flyer. "Hello. I am calling for the job," she said, her voice trembling but determined. The weight of Surrelir was heavy, but Nneka was not ready to break. Not yet. The phone call had been brief, the instructions precise. Come to number 4, Bordelin Road, by 8 a.m. sharp. Do not be late. Nneka had spent her last 500 naira on transport fare, taking a bus from the chaos of Ojalegba to Obalend, and then a tricycle into the hushed, manicured streets of Ikoyi. As she crossed the third mainland bridge, leaving the mainland behind, she felt as though she were crossing into a different country. The noise, the dust, and the desperation of Surrelir faded, replaced by the imposing silence of wealth. Finding the address wasn't difficult. The house demanded attention. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. The mansion sat behind high white walls topped with razor wire and an electric fence that hummed with a low, menacing buzz, a sound that whispered, "Keep out." The gate was a massive slab of black iron, impenetrable and cold. Nneka stood before it, clutching her worn-out handbag, feeling incredibly small. She smoothed down her skirt, which she had ironed with meticulous care that morning, praying the fabric wouldn't betray her poverty. The security guard, a burly man who looked like he wrestled lions for sport, scanned her name on a clipboard before reluctantly opening the pedestrian gate. "Go straight to the main door. Don't touch anything," he grunted. Nneka walked up the long, paved driveway. To her left, a fountain sprayed water into the air, water that was cleaner than what she drank back home. To her right, a fleet of cars gleamed under the morning sun, a Range Rover, a Mercedes-Benz, and a Lexus SUV. It was a display of opulence that felt aggressive. She pressed the doorbell, and moments later, the heavy mahogany door swung open. A young steward in a crisp uniform ushered her in without a word. The air inside hit her like a physical blow, frigid, conditioned air that smelled of lavender and expensive leather. It was so quiet inside that Nneka could hear the sound of her own breathing. Her cheap rubber sandals squeaked against the pristine white marble floors, a sound that made her cringe with every step. "Wait here," the steward said, gesturing to the center of a living room that was larger than her entire tenement building. Nneka stood, afraid to sit on the plush furniture. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an eternity. Finally, a man descended the spiral staircase. He was dressed in a silk robe that probably cost more than her university tuition. This was Femi. He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he walked to a sidebar, poured himself a glass of orange juice, and took a slow sip. Only then did he turn his gaze upon her. His eyes were cold, scanning her from her scuffed shoes to her braided hair, which was due for a redo. He walked over to a velvet sofa and sat down, crossing his legs elegantly. He picked up the CV she had submitted to the security guard at the gate. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a rigid ottoman opposite him. Nneka sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Femi flicked the paper with a manicured finger. "Nneka Obi, University of Lagos. First-class honors in economics." He looked up, a sneer curling his lip. "You are a graduate. A scholar, supposedly. Why do you want to scrub floors?" Nneka swallowed the lump in her throat. The disdain in his voice was thick, humiliating. He looked at her like she was a stain on his marble floor. "Dignity of labor, sir," Nneka replied, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength as she spoke. "I have bills to pay, and I am not afraid of hard work. I just need an opportunity." Femi laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He tossed her CV onto the glass coffee table, as if it were trash. "Dignity of labor. That is what poor people tell themselves to sleep at night. You studied supply and demand, didn't you? Well, the supply of desperate graduates in Lagos is high, and the demand for your dignity is low. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. This house must be spotless. I don't mean Surulere clean, Nneka. I mean Ikoyi clean. If I see a speck of dust, you are out. If you break anything, you will work for 10 years to pay for it. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I understand, Nneka said, lowering her eyes. Good, Femi said, leaning back and taking another sip of juice. The salary is 300,000 naira monthly. Nneka froze. She blinked, sure she had misheard. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Excuse me, sir? Did you say 30,000? Femi smirked, enjoying her shock. I said 300,000 naira. Net. Nneka nearly dropped her bag. The room seemed to spin. 300K? For cleaning? It was unheard of. Junior bankers didn't earn that much. Her mind raced. Is this ritual money? Is he a Yahoo boy? Is this a trap? In Lagos, when the deal is too good, the devil is usually in the details. Sir, she stammered, that is very generous. It is not generosity, Femi cut in sharply. It is the price of your silence and your absolute dedication. You see nothing, you hear nothing, you say nothing. You work, you get paid, you go home. Or you stay in the staff quarters if the traffic is too much. He watched her carefully, gauging her reaction. To Nneka, the offer felt like a golden cage. It was suspicious, dangerous even. But then, the image of Papa Uche's angry face flashed in her mind. She saw her belongings, her books, her clothes, soaked in rainwater in the gutter outside her compound. She thought of the empty pot and the hunger that gnawed at her stomach every night. 300,000 naira would not just pay the rent, it would change her life. It would buy medicine for her mother. It would buy freedom from shame. She looked at Femi, who was watching her like a predator watching prey decide whether to run or eat the bait. Nneka took a deep breath, pushing down the warning bells ringing in her spirit. I will take it, sir, she said softly. Femi's smirk deepened. Good. You start now. The steward will show you where the mops are. Don't disappoint me, first class. As Nneka stood up to follow the steward, the heavy iron gate outside hummed with electricity. She was in, but as she walked deeper into the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just sold something far more valuable than her time. The steward, whose name turned out to be Samuel, led Nneka through a hallway that felt longer than the entirety of her street in Surulere. He pushed open a swinging door to reveal the kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and white marble that looked less like a place for cooking and more like a surgical theater. This is Mama Rose, Samuel announced, gesturing to a stout woman stirring a pot that smelled of rich, spicy goat meat pepper soup. She rules the kitchen. You answer to her, and to Mr. Femi. Nobody else. Mama Rose turned, wiping her hands on an apron that was cleaner than Nneka's best Sunday dress. She eyed Nneka up and down, her expression unreadable. First-class graduate, she muttered, shaking her head. Lagos will humble anybody. Welcome, my daughter. The mops are in the utility closet. Start with the patio. The dust there is stubborn. Nneka nodded, swallowing her pride as she retrieved the cleaning supplies. For the next 3 hours, she worked. She scrubbed tiles until her knuckles ached. She wiped glass sliding doors until they were invisible. Her back screamed in protest, and used to this kind of manual labor, but every time she felt like stopping, the number 300,000 flashed in her mind like a neon sign. By noon, the sun was high and punishing. Nneka was assigned to clean the outdoor terrace overlooking the sprawling garden. The heat was oppressive, but the beauty of the garden was undeniable. Hibiscus flowers bloomed in vibrant reds and pinks, and palm trees swayed gently in the breeze. It was there she saw him. He was kneeling by a bed of hydrangeas, wearing a pair of oil-stained blue overalls that had seen better days. He was wrestling with a stubborn weed, sweat glistening on his dark skin. He looked rough, rugged, and entirely out of place in such a pristine environment. Nneka tried to ignore him, dipping her mop into the bucket, but she could feel his eyes on her. She scrubbed harder, the rhythm of the brush against the stone offering a distraction. Ahan, a deep voice broke her concentration. Fine girl like you, washing floor? Nneka paused, straightening up to wipe a bead of sweat from her forehead. The gardener was leaning on his shovel, looking at her with a crooked grin. His hands were caked in soil. Good afternoon, Nneka said stiffly, turning back to her bucket. She wasn't in the mood for conversation, especially not with a Gardner who likely wanted to complain about the heat or ask for her number. "I say, fine girl like you," he pressed, switching to a heavy, street-laced pidgin. "What'n you day find inside bucket of soapy water? This kind work no fit your body-o." Nneka sighed, her patience thinning. "Work is work, Oga. Please let me do mine so I don't get into trouble." The man chuckled, taking a step closer. He didn't smell like the expensive lavender inside the house. He smelled of earth and hard labor. "I just day look you with pity, my sister. See as you fine. You get shape, you get face. Why you no just find rich boyfriend? One big man in this Ikoyi fit change your life fast. Why suffer yourself?" The word struck a nerve. It was exactly what Beezy had said. It was what the world kept telling her, that her value lay in her body, not her brain or her spirit. Nneka dropped her mop into the bucket with a splash. She turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing. "Mr. Man, focus on your flowers," she snapped, her voice sharp. "I am not here to look for a man, rich or poor. My sustenance comes from above, not from the pockets of men who think they can buy souls. I work with my hands so I can sleep with a clear conscience. Do you understand?" The gardener blinked, taken aback by the ferocity of her response. For a second, the rugged mask slipped, and a look of genuine surprise, and perhaps respect, flashed in his eyes. But he quickly recovered, scratching his beard. "Ehen, not so. You allowed Jesus to pay your rent," he teased, though his voice was softer now. "He makes a way where there is no way," Nneka said, picking up her mop. "Now please excuse me. If Mr. Femi catches us talking, he will fire me, and I doubt you can employ me." She turned her back on him, attacking the floor with renewed vigor, missing the small, satisfied smile that crept onto the gardener's face. Toby watched her work for a moment longer before turning back to his hydrangeas. Nneka didn't know that the gardener wasn't a gardener at all. Toby Adewale was the owner of the mansion, a tech mogul whose software company had just been valued in the billions. He wasn't pruning flowers because he had to. He was doing it because he couldn't trust people anymore. 2 years ago, Toby had been engaged to a woman named Clara. Clara had been the perfect church girl, modest, prayerful, and seemingly uninterested in his wealth. Toby had opened his heart and his bank accounts to her, only to discover a week before the wedding that she was part of a syndicate targeting wealthy bachelors. She had drained one of his offshore accounts and vanished, leaving a note mocking his blind faith. Since then, Toby had built walls higher than the ones surrounding his house. He had sworn never to let a woman close to him again until he was sure, absolute sure, that she wasn't after his money. Femi, his childhood best friend and business partner, had agreed to play the role of the strict Oga of the house, allowing Toby to observe his staff from the shadows, disguised as the lowest-ranking employee. As Toby pulled a weed from the earth, he thought about the fire in Nneka's eyes. Most girls he tested in this disguise dismissed him with disgust because of his dirty clothes, or flirted with him only to mock him later. But Nneka, she had defended her dignity with a fierceness he hadn't seen in years. "We shall see," Toby thought, digging his trowel into the soil. "Everyone has a price. Let's see how long the Madam Economist can hold on to her Bible when the pressure really starts." 2 weeks bled into the next. The initial awe of working in the mansion had faded, replaced by the bone-weary exhaustion of maintaining perfection. Nneka's hands, once soft from holding pens and turning textbook pages, were now calloused from wringing mops and scrubbing grout. She was the first to arrive and the last to leave, her existence reduced to the rhythm of cleaning. Every evening, she walked out of the electric gates with aching joints, clutching her bag tight, but her spirit remained hopeful. She had calculated it. Her first salary would clear Papa Uche's debt and leave enough to buy the expensive hypertension medication her mother needed back in the village. It was a fragile hope, held together by determination. But the atmosphere in the house was shifting. Femi the Oga had been watching her. Not with the scrutiny of an employer checking for dust, but with a lingering, predatory gaze that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It was a Tuesday evening, raining heavily outside. A typical Lagos downpour that turned the streets into rivers. Nneka was in the laundry room, folding towels, preparing to leave, when the intercom on the wall buzzed. "Nneka," Femi's voice crackled through the speaker, smooth and commanding. "Bring a bottle of champagne to the master bedroom." Immediately, Nneka froze. The master bedroom was off-limits after 6 p.m. It was an unspoken rule. Her heart began to thump a warning rhythm against her ribs. She hesitated, looking at the door, but the fear of losing the 300,000 naira salary pushed her forward. "Yes, sir," she whispered. She retrieved the bottle from the fridge, placed it on a silver tray with a crystal glass, and ascended the spiral staircase. The house felt cavernous, the silence amplified by the drumming rain against the roof. She knocked on the heavy oak door. "Come in," Femi called out. Nneka pushed the door open and stepped onto the plush Persian rug that swallowed her feet. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of bedside lamps. The air was thick with the scent of expensive oud cologne and something else, something dangerous. Femi was standing by the window, staring out at the rain. He turned as she entered. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He was clad in a dark silk bathrobe, loosely tied at the waist, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked every bit the predator in his lair. "Put it there," he said, gesturing to the bedside table. Nneka moved quickly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She set the tray down, her hands trembling slightly. "Is that all, sir?" "No," Femi said, stepping closer. "That is not all." He walked around her slowly, inspecting her. Nneka felt like a commodity on a shelf. She clutched her hands together, praying silently. "You work very hard, Nneka," Femi said, his voice dropping an octave. "Too hard for a girl with your assets. First-class brain, first-class beauty. Why are you suffering yourself?" "I am content, sir," Nneka said, taking a step back toward the door. "Content?" Femi scoffed. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a car key. The logo of a Toyota glinted in the lamplight. "Are you content jumping Danfo in the rain? Are you content with that rat hole you live in?" He tossed the key onto the bed. It landed with a soft thud. "Nneka," Femi said smoothly, closing the distance between them. "I can double your salary. 600,000 naira. I can give you this car tonight. You won't have to walk in the rain again. Just be nice to me." The air left the room. Nneka stared at the key, then at Femi. The offer hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. 600,000. A car. It was more than she could save in 5 years. It was the end of her suffering. It was the easy way out. Femi smiled, mistaking her silence for consideration. He reached out to touch her shoulder, his fingers grazing her uniform. Nneka recoiled as if burned, stumbling back until she hit the wall. "Sir," she cried out, her voice shrill with panic. "I am here to work, not to sell my body." Femi's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of cold annoyance. He slammed his whiskey glass down on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Don't be stupid," Femi hissed, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know how many girls would kill for this offer? You are a cleaner. A nobody. Everyone has a price, Nneka. Name yours." "My soul is not for sale," Nneka declared, her voice trembling but her chin raised high. "You can buy a car, sir, and you can buy a house, but you cannot buy me. I may be poor, but I am not cheap." Tears stung her eyes, tears of anger, of humiliation, of fear. She didn't wait for his response. She turned on her heel and marched out the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would explode. "Walk out that door and don't expect a kobo from me," Femi shouted after her. Nneka didn't stop. She ran down the spiral staircase, past the silent kitchen, and out the front door into the pouring rain. She didn't have an umbrella, but she didn't care. The cold rain soaked her instantly, mixing with the hot tears streaming down her face. She expected to be fired the next day. She expected to lose everything. As she ran toward the gate, she didn't see the figure standing in the shadows of the generator house, watching her flee. Toby, still in his Gardner's overalls, stood silently in the dark, watching the woman who had just walked away from a fortune to keep her honor. For the first time in 2 years, the ice around his heart cracked. The morning sun rose over Lagos with a deceptive brightness, casting long, cheerful shadows that mocked the storm raging inside Nneka. She had not slept. The previous night's encounter with Femi had replayed in her mind on an endless, torturous loop. The rustle of his silk robe, the clink of the whiskey glass, the glint of the car key on the bed. She stood before the black iron gate of number 4, Bordelin Road, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She expected the security guard to turn her away. She expected her name to be blacklisted. She expected to be thrown back into the jaws of Papa Uche and the unforgiving streets of Surulere. But the small pedestrian gate clicked open. "Morning, Nneka," the guard grunted, not looking up from his radio. Nneka walked in, her legs feeling like lead. She wasn't fired. In a way, this was worse. Being fired would have been a clean break, a decisive end. Being kept on meant she was now trapped in the cage with the beast she had offended. She entered the main house, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The air conditioning felt colder today, biting into her skin. "Ah, the Holy Spirit has arrived," a voice drawled from the living room. Nneka froze. Femi was sitting in the same spot where he had interviewed her, sipping coffee, looking fresh and untroubled. There was no shame in his eyes, only a cruel, dancing amusement. "Good morning, sir," Nneka whispered, clutching her cleaning bucket. "The marble in the foyer looks dull," Femi said, not looking at her. "Scrub it again. On your knees. And Nneka, use a toothbrush for the grout. We wouldn't want you to miss any dirt, seeing as you are so concerned with purity." It was a punishment disguised as work. For the next 4 hours, Nneka scrubbed until her knees were bruised and her fingers were raw. Every time she looked up, Femi was there, passing by, talking loudly on the phone, making subtle references to ungrateful people and wasted opportunities. "Some people enjoy trekking in the rain," he laughed into his phone, his eyes locking onto hers. "They think suffering is a badge of honor." The mockery was precise and surgical. It was salt rubbed vigorously into an open wound. The other staff sensed the tension. The cook, Mama Rose, gave her extra portions of rice, but refused to look her in the eye, sensing that Nneka was a marked woman. By 2 p.m., Nneka couldn't breathe. The walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in. She grabbed her empty bucket and fled through the back door, heading for the one place where the hum of the city drowned out the silence of the house, behind the massive diesel generator. She sat on an overturned crate, hidden by the overgrown bougainvillea and the deafening roar of the machine. Finally, the dam broke. She buried her face in her hands and wept, ugly, shaking sobs that racked her entire body. She cried for her mother's failing health, for the rent she didn't have, and for the dignity she was fighting so hard to keep in a city that seemed determined to strip it away. "Why you dey cry?" The voice was rough, cutting through the noise. Nneka jumped, hastily wiping her face with her forearm. Toby was standing there, leaning on a shovel, chewing on a chewing stick. He looked dirtier than usual, his blue overalls stained with red earth and grease. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "I am not crying," Nneka lied, her voice thick. "It is the smoke from the generator." Toby scoffed, spitting to the side. "Lie to yourself, no lie to me. I hear what'n happen. The whole compound on here." Nneka looked away, shame burning her cheeks. Toby took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. "Oga offer you enjoyment, you refuse. He want give you car, want give you soft life. But you say no." He shook his head, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. "You Christians suffer too much. You think say if you suffer for earth, God go give you duplex for heaven? My sister, use your head. Lagos na jungle. Eat or be eaten." Nneka looked up at him. The Gardner looked at her with the same pity everyone else did. The pity of the pragmatic for the idealistic. Something inside her snapped. She stood up, dusting off her skirt, her eyes locking onto his. "It is not suffering," she snapped, her voice rising above the hum of the generator. Toby raised an eyebrow. "What'n be suffering if not this? See your shoe. See your hand. It is peace." Nneka cried out, tapping her chest. "You won't understand. You think money is the answer to everything? Look at your Oga. He has everything, cars, money, this big house. But does he look happy? Does he sleep well?" She stepped closer to Toby, poking a finger toward the main house. "I may be poor, Mr. Gardner. I may trek in the rain. But when I lay my head on my mat at night, I sleep. I don't need whiskey to close my eyes. I don't need to buy people to feel loved." She took a breath, her voice trembling but resolute. "Money without peace is just expensive trouble. It is a golden casket. I will not trade my peace for a Toyota. Never." Toby froze. The chewing stick paused midway to his mouth. He stared at her, genuinely stunned. He had expected her to be regretful. He had expected her to say she was holding out for marriage, or that she was afraid of getting caught. But she spoke of peace. The word echoed in Toby's mind. He was a billionaire in naira and dollars. He had properties in London and Dubai. He could buy this street. But peace? He hadn't known peace since Clara left. He slept with pills. He checked his security cameras 5 times a night. He trusted no one. He was the man in the golden casket she described. For a moment, the disguise felt heavy on his skin. He looked at this girl, broke, battered, kneeling in the dirt, and realized with a jolt that she possessed something his billions couldn't buy. You really believe that?" Toby asked, his voice losing its pigeon edge, dropping into a quiet, serious tone. I know it, Nneka whispered, picking up her bucket. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a floor to scrub. She walked past him, her head high, leaving Toby standing alone behind the generator house. He watched her go, the cynicism in his heart cracking just a little wider, letting in a sliver of light he wasn't sure he was ready to see. The truce between Nneka and the Gardner had left an uneasy quiet in the air. For 2 days following their conversation by the generator, Toby had avoided her gaze, but Nneka felt his eyes on her constantly, a heavy, brooding presence that seemed to weigh more than the buckets of water she lugged across the marble floors. She had returned to her routine, clinging to the fragile peace she had defended so fiercely. She scrubbed, she dusted, and she hummed hymns under her breath to drown out the oppressive silence of the mansion. But peace in Lagos is often a flimsy curtain, easily torn by the sharp ring of a telephone. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Nneka was polishing the gold-plated faucets in the guest bathroom on the ground floor, a room so opulent it was larger than her entire apartment in Surulere. Her phone, which she kept on silent in her apron pocket, began to vibrate violently against her hip. She ignored it at first. Personal calls were strictly forbidden during work hours. But the vibration persisted, insistent and frantic. She pulled it out, checking the screen. It was Chitty, her younger brother in the village. Her heart skipped a beat. Chitty never called during the day. Airtime was expensive, and he knew she was working. Checking over her shoulder to ensure Femi wasn't lurking in the hallway, Nneka slipped into the bathroom and locked the heavy mahogany door. She slid the answer button. Chitty, is everything okay? Sister Nneka. Chitty's voice was high-pitched, laced with a terror that made Nneka's blood run cold. It is Mama. Mama has collapsed. Nneka gripped the edge of the marble sink, her knuckles turning white. Collapsed? What do you mean collapsed? She was fine when we spoke on Sunday. She was complaining of stomach pain since yesterday, but she didn't want to disturb you. Chitty rushed out, his voice cracking. Today she just fell down in the market. We rushed her to the general hospital. The doctor said her appendix has ruptured. It is bad, Nneka. It is very bad. Poisons are leaking inside her. The room spun. Ruptured appendix. Okay, Nneka stammered, trying to keep her voice steady for her brother's sake. Let them operate. Tell them to operate immediately. They refused, sister. Chitty was sobbing now. The doctor said we must deposit money before they can take her to the theater. They said we need 250,000 naira for the surgery and the drugs. If we don't pay now, they said. He couldn't finish the sentence. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. 250,000 naira. Nneka looked at her reflection in the gilded mirror. Her face was gray. She had exactly 4,500 naira in her bank account. Tell them I will send it, she lied, her voice hollow. Tell them to start prep. I will send it soon. Just stay with her, Chitty. Pray for her. She ended the call, and the phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the tiled floor. The silence that followed was deafening. 250,000 naira. It was a fortune. Just 2 days ago, Femi had offered her 600,000 naira and a car. If she had just said yes, if she had just allowed him to touch her, her mother would be safe right now. The thought was a poisonous snake, coiling around her mind. Is your dignity worth your mother's life? The voice hissed. You chose peace, Nneka. Does this feel like peace? Her legs gave way. She sank to the cold, hard floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The pain in her chest was physical, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. God, she whispered, the word tearing out of her throat. God, where are you? The tears came then, not the silent, polite tears of the chapel, but the ugly, heaving sobs of a woman at the end of her rope. She rocked back and forth, her forehead pressing against the cold porcelain of the bathtub. You said I should not worry, she cried out, her voice rising in desperation, forgetting where she was. You said you supply all my needs. My mother is dying, Lord. She is dying because I don't have paper, because I chose to be righteous. Is this my reward? To watch her die? She slammed her hand against the floor. Please, I don't have anyone else. Don't take her from me. Provide a ram in the bush, Jehovah. Send help. Anyone. Anything. Outside the bathroom door, in the hallway, Toby froze. He had been coming to fix a loose hinge on the pantry door, screwdriver in hand, still wearing his dirty overalls. He had heard the ringtone, then the hushed panic, and now the raw, guttural sound of a soul breaking. He stood there, hand hovering over the doorknob. He heard every word. He heard the figure, 250,000 naira. He heard the diagnosis. and he heard the agonizing wrestling match between her faith and her reality. Toby's heart hammered in his chest. He knew, with a sickening clarity, what this meant. He knew Femi had offered her money for sex just 48 hours ago. Now, life had backed her into a corner. She was desperate. Desperate people did desperate things. He could open the door right now. He could pull out his phone, transfer the money to the hospital, and end her nightmare in 10 seconds. He had millions sitting idle in his current account. It would cost him nothing, but he didn't move. The scars of his past flared up, the memory of Clara, who had staged a fake kidnapping of her sister to get money from him. Was this real? Toby thought, his cynicism fighting his empathy. Is this another script? A tactic to get money without sex? But the sobbing, it was too raw. It sounded like the way he had cried when his own mother died. He leaned his forehead against the wood of the door, closing his eyes. This was it. This was the ultimate test. The fire was hot now. If Nneka was truly gold, she would shine. If she was like the rest, she would break. She would either go back to Femi's room and accept the offer she had rejected, or she would find another way. Toby stepped back into the shadows as the weeping inside the bathroom subsided into low, whimpering prayers. He gripped his screwdriver tight. Show me who you are, Nneka, he thought, a knot of dread and hope tightening in his stomach. Please, for the love of God, don't prove me right. The morning sun filtered through the high, arched windows of the mansion, casting long beams of light across the polished mahogany floors. But to Nneka, the world was gray. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Every time her phone vibrated, a text from MTN, a WhatsApp notification, her heart seized, fearing it was Chitty calling to tell her that her mother was gone. She had spent the night awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, bargaining with God. If you save her, I will fast for 40 days. If you save her, I will never complain again. But the morning had come with no miracle, only the crushing reality of a 2 p.m. deadline the hospital had set before they would discharge her mother to go and rest. A polite medical euphemism for sending her home to die. Nneka, Femi's voice had barked through the intercom earlier. Clean the private study. The dust on the bookshelves is becoming a nuisance. The private study was usually locked. It was Femi's sanctuary, a room of dark wood and leather where business was conducted. Nneka pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The air conditioner hummed a low, steady note, chilling the sweat on her skin. She began to dust mechanically, her mind miles away in a chaotic general hospital ward in the east. She wiped the leather armchairs, the brass lamp, the framed certificates. Then she reached the massive executive desk. She froze. There, sitting right in the center of the green leather blotter, was a stack of cash. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't in an envelope. It was a thick, pristine brick of mint 1,000 naira notes, bound by a paper band. Nneka stared at it. The silence in the room suddenly felt deafening. She looked up at the corners of the ceiling, no cameras. She looked at the door, closed. She was alone. She put down her duster and took a step closer, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't need to count it to know how much it was. A standard bundle of 1,000 naira notes was 500,000 naira. 500,000. It was double what the hospital needed. The voice in her head, the one born of desperation and grief, began to whisper. This is it, Nneka. This is the ram in the bush. You prayed for a miracle, and here it is. Femi is careless. He is swimming in money. He won't even miss one bundle. You can take half. Just half. You can save your mother. Her hand trembled as she reached out. Her fingers brushed the cool, crisp texture of the notes. It felt like salvation. It felt like life. All she had to do was slip it into her bra. She could walk out, go to the bathroom, transfer the money to Chitty via the banking app on her phone, and her mother would be in surgery within the hour. Take it, the voice screamed. God helps those who help themselves. She gripped the bundle. The weight of it was intoxicating. She could hear the beep of the heart monitor, see the doctors rushing her mother into the theater. But then another image flashed in her mind. She saw herself. Not the Nneka who was a cleaner, but the Nneka who was a daughter of God. She saw her mother's face, the woman who had sold her wrappers to pay for Nneka's jam form, the woman who had taught her that a good name is better than silver and gold. If she saved her mother's life with stolen money, every breath her mother took would be a testament to a crime. It would be a life bought with sin. Nneka squeezed her eyes shut, a tear escaping and trailing down her cheek. I cannot, she whispered to the empty room. I cannot. Her hand shook violently as she let go of the money. But then a terrifying thought struck her. What if it goes missing later? What if someone else takes it and they blame the cleaner? She couldn't leave it there. She needed a witness. She snatched the bundle up, not to steal it, but to get rid of it. She turned and ran out of the study, her heart pounding like a drum. She hurried through the kitchen, ignoring Mama Rose, and burst out the back door into the garden. The heat hit her instantly. Toby was there, near the hibiscus hedge, digging a hole for a new plant. He looked up as she approached, his eyes narrowing. He saw the bundle in her hand. For a split second, a look of grim confirmation crossed his face. She took it, he thought. She broke. Nneka stopped in front of him, chest heaving. She thrust the money toward him. "Take this," she gasped, her voice shrill. Toby stood up slowly, wiping his dirty hands on his overalls. He looked at the cash, then at her face. "What'n be this?" "I found it in the study," Nneka said, the words tumbling out. "It was on the table. Open. Just sitting there." Toby stared at her. So, give it to Ogafemi," Nneka cried, shoving the bundle into his chest so he had to catch it with his soil-stained hands. "He forgot it. Tell him his cleaner found it. Tell him to be more careful." Toby looked down at the money, 500,000 naira. He knew exactly why it was there. He had told Femi to leave it. He knew about her mother. He knew she needed exactly half of this stack to save her life. "Nneka," Toby said, his voice dropping, losing the pigeon affectation for a moment. "You need this money. I hear say your mama sick. Why you no keep am? Nobody go know." Nneka stepped back, shaking her head vigorously, fresh tears spilling over. "The devil is a liar, Mr. Man. If I take that money, I am a thief. If my mother dies, she goes to be with the Lord. But if I steal to save her, I kill my own soul. I will not steal. I will not." She wiped her face with her apron, her expression one of broken devastation, but absolute resolve. "Please just give it to him. If it gets missing, they will blame the cleaner. And I don't want police case on top of my sorrow." She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and ran back into the house, leaving Toby standing alone in the garden. Toby looked at the bundle of cash in his hands, then at the spot where she had stood. His hands, usually steady, were trembling. He had tested people for 2 years. He had thrown money, power, and lust at them, and they had all crumbled. But this girl, this starving, desperate girl, had held a fortune in her hands, a fortune that could save the person she loved most, and she had given it back. He felt a crack in his chest, a physical sensation of something breaking open. It was his cynicism. It was his pride. She chose integrity over her mother's life, Toby whispered to the wind, his world tilting on its axis. He was shaken to his very core. He wasn't looking at a cleaner anymore. He was looking at a giant. The sun had dipped below the horizon, plunging Ikoyi into a twilight of deep purples and artificial ambers from the streetlights. The electric fence hummed its low, monotonous warning, a sound that usually intimidated Nneka, but tonight she barely heard it. She sat on the concrete curb just outside the massive black gate, her head buried in her knees. She wasn't waiting for a bus. She was waiting for the courage to go home and face an empty room, and eventually, the news of a funeral. She had missed the deadline. The 2 p.m. cutoff for the deposit had come and gone. She hadn't called Chitty because she had nothing to say. By now, the doctors had likely moved her mother out of the emergency ward, leaving her to the mercy of fate. The small pedestrian gate creaked open. Nneka didn't look up. She assumed it was the security guard coming to chase her away for loitering. "Madam Economist." The voice was low and familiar. Nneka lifted her head slowly. It was the gardener. He was still in his oil-stained overalls, holding a bottle of cold water. He sat down next to her on the curb, ignoring the dust that would cling to his clothes. He held out the water. Nneka shook her head weakly. "I am not thirsty." Toby retracted the bottle, but didn't leave. He stared at the asphalt road, watching a stray cat dart across the street. The image of Nneka handing back that bundle of cash, 500,000 naira, twice what she needed to save her own mother, was burned into his retinas. It defied every logic he had built his life around for the past 2 years. "You are a strange woman," he said softly, breaking the silence. Nneka wiped a tear from her chin. "I am just a tired woman, Mr. Gardner." "No," Toby insisted, turning to look at her profile. The street lamp cast a halo around her braided hair. "I saw the way you looked at that money. I know you needed it. I heard you on the phone yesterday. Your mama is dying. That money, it was the answer. Nobody would have known. Ogafemi throws money around like waste paper. So why? Why didn't you take it? Nneka looked at him. Her eyes were swollen, pools of sorrow so deep Toby felt he could drown in them. Because God is faithful, she whispered, her voice cracking like dry wood. Toby frowned. Faithful? Nneka, look at you. You are trekking. Your mother is sick. You are broke. Where is the faithfulness? It is inside, she said, tapping her chest. If I took that money, I would have saved her body, yes. But I would have killed the connection between me and my maker. I would have traded my eternity for temporary relief. Even if my mother, even if she goes tonight. She choked on a sob, covering her mouth. Even if she goes, I cannot steal. I cannot become the darkness I am fighting. My mother raised me better. God expects better. She looked up at the sky, blinking away fresh tears. If he does not save her, he is still God. If he saves her, he is still God. I will not help God by becoming a thief. Toby felt the air leave his lungs. He had expected bitterness. He had expected her to curse the rich. Instead, he found a resolve that was terrifying in its purity. He realized then that he was the pauper. He had billions in the bank, but his soul was a wasteland of suspicion and paranoia. She had nothing, yet she possessed a fortress of integrity he couldn't even fathom. He felt a sudden, desperate need to touch that kind of faith, to see if it could heal the rot inside him. Suddenly, Toby reached out and grabbed her rough, calloused hand. Nneka flinched, startled. Mr. Gardner? Pray for me, Nneka, Toby said, his voice urgent, stripped of all pretense. What? Pray for me, he repeated, squeezing her hand tight. I am lost. I have been walking in the dark for a long time. I don't trust. I don't feel. I am empty. Pray for me. Nneka looked at him, really looked at him. She didn't see a dirty Gardner. She saw a man in pain, a soul crying out. Her own grief was heavy, but the instinct to intercede was ingrained in her DNA. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pull away. Right there, under the streetlights of Ikoyi, amidst the hum of the electric fence and the distant honking of cars, Nneka closed her eyes and gripped his hand back. Father in heaven, she began, her voice starting low but rising with a sudden fiery strength. I bring this man before you. You know his name. You know his heart. Lord, I don't know the burden he carries, but you are the burden bearer. Toby bowed his head. Her hand was warm, her grip strong. Father! Nneka cried out, tears streaming down her face again, but this time for him. Break every chain of despair in his life. Every spirit of heaviness. I bind it in the name of Jesus. Whatever hurt has turned his heart into stone, Lord, touch it now. Melt it with your fire. Give him peace, Lord. The peace that surpasses all understanding. Let him know that you are real. Let him know he is not alone. She prayed with such fire, such agonizing sincerity, that Toby felt a physical sensation in his chest, a tightening, and then a release. It was as if the concrete walls he had built around his heart to keep Clara and everyone else out were crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of her words. She wasn't praying for his money or his job. She was praying for him. Thank you, Jesus, Nneka whispered finally, squeezing his hand one last time. Amen. Toby kept his head bowed for a long moment, hiding the single tear that had escaped his eye. He sniffed, wiping his face with his dirty sleeve before looking up. Thank you, he mumbled, his voice thick. Nneka offered him a sad, tired smile. God hears us, even when we think he is silent. She stood up, dusting off her skirt. I have to go home now. I have to call my brother. Toby watched her walk away, her figure retreating into the shadows of the street. As soon as she turned the corner, the Gardner vanished. Toby pulled out his secure, encrypted smartphone from his overall pocket. His fingers flew across the screen. He didn't call Femi. He called the number on the CV Nneka had submitted, the emergency contact number. He dialed Chitty. Hello. Who is this? A frantic voice answered. This is Dr. Williams from the Lagos Foundation. Toby lied smoothly, adopting a professional tone. We have an anonymous donor program for emergency cases. Is this the brother of Mrs. Obi? Yes. Yes. We have just received a directive to cover the full cost of her surgery. Transferring 500,000 naira to the hospital account now. Tell the doctors to proceed immediately. Toby hung up before the boy could scream his thanks. He opened his banking app, authorized the transfer to the hospital details he had hacked from the system earlier that day, and watched the transaction successful notification pop up. He sat back on the curb, looking at the spot where Nneka had prayed. For the first time in 2 years, the night air didn't feel cold. It felt like grace. The following week began with a lightness Nneka hadn't felt in years. Her mother's surgery had been successful, paid for by a miraculous, anonymous intervention from something called the Lagos Foundation. Chitty had called her, weeping with joy, saying the doctors had performed the procedure just in time. Nneka had spent the entire Sunday in church, dancing at the altar, thanking God for the ram in the bush. She walked into number 4, Bordelin Road, with a bounce in her step. She even had a small nylon bag in her hand containing 2 meat pies she had bought from a street vendor. One was for her, and the other was for the Gardner, Toby. She wanted to thank him. His listening ear and his request for prayer had been the turning point. She wanted to tell him that God had answered, that he shouldn't give up on faith because a miracle had happened for her mother. As she entered the compound, however, the atmosphere was different. The air crackled with a frantic, nervous energy. The usually lazy security guards were standing at rigid attention. The driveway had been swept clean of even a single leaf. Samuel, the steward, and Mama Rose were standing in a line by the front door, smoothing down their uniforms. "What is happening?" Nneka asked Samuel, pausing by the fountain. "The chairman is back," Samuel whispered, his eyes wide. "He has been away on business, but he just radioed that he is at the gate." Nneka frowned. "Chairman?" She thought Femi was the owner. Before she could ask, the heavy black iron gates swung open with a majestic groan. A black Mercedes-Benz G63 AMG, a G-Wagon, rolled into the compound like a tank made of onyx and money. Its engine growled, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in Nneka's chest. It was followed by a Toyota Prado filled with security detail. Nneka stepped back onto the grass, clutching her bag of meat pies. She watched as the G-Wagon came to a halt in front of the main entrance. The driver's door opened, and a uniformed chauffeur hurried to open the back passenger door. But the passenger didn't wait. The door swung open, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a bespoke navy blue suit that fit him like a second skin. His shoes were polished Italian leather, gleaming in the morning sun. A gold wristwatch, likely a Patek Philippe, glinted on his wrist. He looked powerful, commanding, and wealthy beyond measure. He turned to address the staff, and Nneka's breath hitched in her throat. The face was clean-shaven now, the beard trimmed to perfection, but the eyes were the same. It was the Gardner. Nneka blinked, sure she was hallucinating. She looked around for the real Gardner in his dirty overalls, but he wasn't there. Then the front door of the house opened. Femi rushed out. But instead of acting like the imperious Oga Nneka knew, Femi hurried down the steps and bowed slightly. "Welcome back, Toby," Femi said, taking the briefcase from the man's hand. "Everything is in order." Toby. The world tilted on its axis. The ground beneath Nneka's feet felt like it had turned to water. The meat pies slipped from her numb fingers, landing in the grass. Toby looked up then. His eyes scanned the line of staff and landed squarely on Nneka. He didn't look triumphant. He looked terrified. He said something to Femi, dismissed the staff with a wave of his hand, and walked straight toward Nneka. The confident stride of a billionaire faltered as he got closer to the cleaner. "Nneka," he said, his voice soft, lacking the pigeon affectation he had used for weeks. Nneka backed away, her hands trembling. "Toby? What? Who are you?" "I am Talyawanami Adewale," he said, stopping a few feet from her. "I own this house. I own this estate." The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. The memories of the last few weeks flooded her mind, but now they were tainted. She remembered Femi's sexual harassment. She remembered the pile of cash left out in the study. She remembered crying behind the generator while he leaned on a shovel, watching her. "You," Nneka whispered, her voice shaking with a rising tide of rage. "You are the owner." "Yes," Toby said, reaching out a hand. "Please let me explain." "Don't touch me," Nneka screamed, slapping his hand away. The sound echoed across the silent compound. The security guards flinched, but nobody moved. "You played with my life?" she accused, tears springing to her eyes, not tears of sorrow this time, but of humiliation. "You stood there in your dirty clothes and watched me weep? You watched me beg God for money to save my mother while you had billions sitting in your pocket? You watched Femi harass me? It was a game. My suffering was entertainment for you." No, Nneka, it wasn't entertainment," Toby pleaded, his composure cracking. "I have been hurt before. I have been scammed by people who claim to love God. I needed to know. I needed to know if you were real. I needed to know if your integrity was genuine. So I was a lab rat?" Nneka spat, her voice thick with disgust. "You tested me like a product? You dangled temptation in front of a starving woman to see if she would bite? Do you know what I went through? Do you know the nights I didn't sleep? I know, Toby said, stepping closer. And you passed. Nneka, you are better than gold. You are everything I have been looking for. That is why I paid for your mother's surgery. The Lagos Foundation, that was me. He thought this admission would calm her. He thought she would be grateful. Instead, Nneka looked at him with horror. You paid? You knew my mother was dying, and you waited? You waited until I was broken before you helped? You think your money buys you the right to play God with people's lives. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her plastic ID card. It felt heavy in her hand, a symbol of the golden cage she had been trapped in. You are a cruel man, Toby, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You have money, but you are poor. You are so poor that you have to destroy people to feel safe. Nneka, please. I don't want your job, she said. She threw the ID card at his chest. It bounced off his expensive suit and clattered onto the driveway. And I don't want your money. If I had known the foundation was you, I would have rejected it. Keep your billions. I will keep my peace. She turned around. Nneka, wait, Toby called out, panic rising in his voice. Where are you going? She didn't answer. She walked toward the heavy black gates, her head held high. She was walking back to poverty. She was walking back to Surelair, to the heat, to the uncertainty. But as she stepped out of the electric gates of the mansion, leaving the billionaire standing in his driveway looking utterly defeated, Nneka felt something she hadn't felt since she entered that house. She felt clean. 2 weeks had passed since Nneka walked out of the golden gates of Ikoyi. Surelair had welcomed her back with its familiar chaos, the shouting bus conductors, the smell of exhaust fumes, and the relentless hustle. She had moved out of Papa Uche's compound to avoid the shame of her failed big break, and was staying with a cousin in a smaller, cramped room near Ojuelegba. To survive, she had set up a small roadside stand on a busy street corner, roasting corn and ube, African pear, over a coal pot. It was a far cry from the air-conditioned marble halls of the Bordelin mansion. The smoke from the coals stung her eyes, and the heat of the fire darkened her skin. Passers-by would haggle over 50 naira, insulting her wares in the process. Yet, as Nneka fanned the embers, sending sparks into the evening air, her spirit remained unbroken. She had no money, but she had her voice. She sang hymns as she turned the corn, her melody cutting through the noise of the street. Her mother was recovering well in the village, and her conscience was as clear as the sky after a storm. But the storm came. It started as a drizzle on a Tuesday evening, quickly turning into a torrential Lagos downpour. Pedestrians scattered, running for cover under shop awnings. Nneka hurriedly covered her coal pot with a rusty zinc sheet and tried to shield herself with a broken umbrella. Through the curtain of rain, headlights cut through the gloom. A vehicle was approaching slowly, too slowly for the traffic. It was a black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. It looked like a beast from another world, its polished exterior repelling the rain that soaked everything else. Nneka's heart hammered against her ribs. She recognized the car. The vehicle pulled up right in front of her modest corn stand, blocking the traffic. Horns blared from the buses behind it, but the G-Wagon didn't move. The driver's door opened. Toby stepped out. He wasn't wearing the Gardner's overalls, nor was he protected by an umbrella. He was dressed in a pristine white kaftan and expensive Italian loafers. He stepped straight into a muddy puddle, ruinous for the leather, but he didn't even look down. His eyes were locked on Nneka. "Toby," she whispered, the sound lost in the rain. He walked toward her, the rain instantly soaking his clothes, plastering the expensive fabric to his skin. He looked nothing like the arrogant billionaire who had stood in the driveway 2 weeks ago. He looked like a man who had not slept, a man who had been wrestling with ghosts. He stopped in front of the coal pot. Nneka stood her ground, clutching her corn fan like a shield. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Have you come to mock me again? To see how the mighty first-class graduate is roasting corn?" Toby didn't answer. Instead, he did something that made the few people watching from the shelter of the shops gasp. He dropped to his knees. Right there in the mud. Right there in the filth of the Ojuelegba gutter. The billionaire knelt before the corn cellar. "Nneka," he said, his voice raw, fighting the sound of the rain. "I have not come to mock you. I have come to surrender." "Get up," Nneka said, panicked, looking around. "People are watching. You are ruining your clothes." "Let them watch," Toby shouted, rain mixing with the tears that were now streaming freely down his face. "Let them see. I was a man who had everything, Nneka, but I had nothing. I was broken by a woman who looked like an angel, but had the heart of a devil. She took my love and turned it into a weapon. Because of her, I thought faith was a scam. I thought everyone was a thief waiting for a chance. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading, stripped of all defenses. I built walls of money to protect myself. But you walked into my house with nothing but your Bible and your dignity, and you tore those walls down. You showed me God again. You showed me that integrity is not a myth. Nneka felt the tears hot on her own cheeks. She lowered the umbrella, letting the rain wash over her too. I tried to buy you, Toby continued, his voice breaking. I tried to break you, but you broke me instead. Nneka, I don't just want you to be my cleaner. I don't even just want you to be my wife. He reached into his soaked pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it, he just held it tight. I want you to be my moral compass, he whispered. I want you to lead me back to the light. Without you, I am just a rich man in a dark room. With you, I can be a good man. He held out the box. Forgive me, Nneka. Please. The world seemed to stop. The noise of the buses faded. Nneka looked at the man kneeling in the mud. She didn't see the billionaire Talyawanami Adewale. She saw the Gardner she had prayed for under the streetlights of Ikoyi. She saw a soul that had been lost and was now found. She remembered the verse she held onto. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Slowly, a smile broke through her tears, radiant and warm despite the cold rain. She dropped the fan and reached out her hands. Get up, Toby, she said softly. Toby hesitated, unsure. Get up, she repeated, grabbing his hands and pulling him to his feet. He stood, towering over her, yet looking at her with total reverence. God is a God of second chances, Nneka said, looking deep into his eyes. And who am I to deny what God has given? Toby let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 2 years. He pulled her into his arms, oblivious to the charcoal smoke, the mud, and the rain. He held her as if she were the only real thing in a world of counterfeits. Thank you, he buried his face in her neck. Thank you. Nneka held him back, closing her eyes. She had lost her job, she had lost her pride, and she had walked through the fire. But as she stood there in the arms of the man who loved her, not for her body, but for her spirit, she realized that the hardest journey had led to the most beautiful destination. And so Nneka didn't just find a husband. She found a partner who valued her soul more than her beauty. And Toby? He found the one thing his billions couldn't buy, peace. This story teaches us a powerful lesson, besties. In a world that constantly pressures us to compromise, your integrity is your most expensive currency. Nneka could have taken the shortcut. She could have sold her dignity for a car or stolen the money to save her mother. But because she stood firm in the rain, she ended up reigning in the palace. Remember, no condition is permanent, and character will always open doors that money cannot unlock. What do you think? Would you have returned that 500,000 naira if you were in Nneka's shoes? Be honest. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this episode on the Folktale Bestie. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way. Until next time, keep your head high and your heart pure. Bye for now.